The night my husband yelled those words at me is still clear in my mind. I remember the sound of his voice before I remember the meaning. It was loud, sharp, like something breaking inside the room. "You're a tramp," he shouted, "and your kid will be too." Dear listeners, before we begin this story, I want to ask you a favor. If my story resonates with your heart, please like this video and subscribe to the channel and write in the comments which city or state you are listening from. It warms my spirit to know how far my voice travels. Happy listening. For a moment, I didn't understand what he had said. I just stood there, holding my son close to my chest. My arms felt weak, but I didn't let go. Then he kicked us out. No long talk, no warning, just his hand pointing to the door and his face full of anger I had never seen before. It was late. The air outside was cold, and my son was half asleep. I didn't even have shoes on properly. I remember thinking, this can't be real. This is my life. As I stepped out, the door closed behind us. The sound of it shutting felt final, like something had ended forever. I stood there for a long time. I didn't cry at first. I just looked down at my child and whispered, "It's okay, mommy is here." But inside, I was breaking. That night changed everything. It changed how I saw love. It changed how I saw myself. I had believed we were a family. I had believed that even when things were hard, we would face them together. I was wrong. I didn't know where we would sleep. I didn't know how I would feed my child the next day. All I knew was that I had been thrown away like I meant nothing. As I walked down the dark street, my son's small breath warm against my neck, I made a quiet promise. I told myself I would survive this, even if I didn't know how yet. I didn't know that 1 year later, everything would look very different. I didn't know that the words he screamed at me would come back to him in a way he never expected. But that night there was only fear, only silence, and a long road ahead of us. This is my story. This is what happened after that door closed behind us. Before that night, my life looked normal from the outside. We had a small apartment, nothing fancy, but it was home. I cooked dinner most nights. I cleaned. I took care of our son. My husband worked long hours, and when he came home, he was usually tired. I told myself that was why he was quiet, why he didn't smile much anymore. At first, the words were small, little comments that hurt but didn't leave marks. He would say I talked too much or that I didn't understand money. I told myself all couples fight. I told myself this was normal. When I got pregnant, things changed. He wasn't happy the way I expected him to be. He said it wasn't the right time. I remember sitting on the edge of the bed, holding the test in my hands, shaking. I was scared, but also hopeful. I thought a baby would bring us closer. I was wrong again. After our son was born, I stopped working. Childcare was expensive, and my husband said it made sense for me to stay home. I trusted him. Slowly, I lost my own money, my own choices, even my own voice. If I asked for something, he would sigh. If I tried to explain how tired I was, he would say his job was harder. I started to feel small. Still, I stayed because of our son, because I believed love meant holding on. The night everything ended started like any other. Dinner was late. The baby was crying. My husband came home angry. He said the house was a mess. He said I didn't respect him. I tried to stay calm. I said, "I'm doing my best." That's when his face changed. That's when the shouting began. He said things I had never heard before. Cruel things, things meant to hurt. When he called me a tramp, I felt something inside me go numb. When he talked about our child like that, something broke open. I said, "Please don't say that about him." That was when he told us to leave. I packed nothing. There was no time. I just grabbed my son and walked out. That first night, we slept on a bus seat until morning. I held my son the entire time. My back hurt, but I didn't move. The next day, I went to a shelter. I was embarrassed. I felt ashamed, even though I knew I shouldn't. The shelter was loud, crowded, but it was warm. They gave us a small room, a bed, a blanket. That night, after my son fell asleep, I finally cried. I cried quietly so he wouldn't hear. I cried for the life I thought I had and for the future I was afraid of. The days after that were hard, really hard. I filled out forms. I stood in lines. I listened to people talk down to me. Sometimes I wanted to give up. Sometimes I felt like my husband's words were true, like maybe I really was nothing. But every time my son smiled at me, something inside me stood up again. He didn't know we were homeless. He didn't know his father had rejected him. He only knew that I was there, that I held him, that I loved him. I started looking for work, any work. I took a cleaning job at night while a volunteer watched my son. It was tiring. My hands were rough. My body ached. But each small paycheck felt like hope, like proof that I could stand on my own. I saved every coin. I skipped meals so my son wouldn't have to. I learned how strong hunger can make you. Weeks turned into months. Slowly, things changed. I found a small room to rent. It wasn't pretty, but it had a door that locked and a window that let light in. To me, it felt like safety. I kept working. I didn't stop. I told myself one day he will see what he lost, but I didn't live for revenge. I lived for my child. I didn't know yet how the story would turn. I didn't know how much I would grow, but I knew one thing for sure. We were no longer broken people on the street. We were survivors. The first few months on my own felt like walking through thick fog. Every day I woke up tired before the day even started, not just tired in my body, but tired in my heart. The small room we rented had thin walls. I could hear other people coughing, arguing, laughing. At night, when everything went quiet, my thoughts became loud. I would lie awake and replay his words again and again. You're a tramp, and your kid will be too. Sometimes I wondered how someone who once held my hand could say that. I searched my memory for signs I had missed, moments I ignored because I wanted to believe in love. But regret does not feed a child, and memories do not pay rent. So every morning I forced myself to get up. I washed my face with cold water. I looked at myself in the mirror and whispered, "You can do this." I found another job, daytime work at a small grocery store. The pay was low, but it was steady. I would drop my son off at a community daycare run by older women. They smiled at him. They told me he was a good boy. That mattered more than they knew. My days became simple and strict. Wake up, work, pick up my son, cook, sleep. There was no space for dreaming, only surviving. Some nights, my son would ask for his father. He was still young, but children feel absence deeply. He would say, "Where is Daddy?" I never spoke badly about my husband. I didn't want my pain to become my child's burden, so I would say, "Daddy is not here right now." Then I would hold him close, sometimes too close, as if I could protect him from the world by holding him tighter. I didn't hear from my husband for a long time. No calls, no messages. Part of me felt relief. Another part felt invisible. It was strange how someone could erase us so easily, as if we had never mattered. Money was always on my mind. Every bill felt heavy. Every expense felt like a risk. I learned how to stretch food, how to turn one meal into two, how to make soup from almost nothing. I learned which stores had discounts late at night, which days bread was cheapest, which smiles were fake and which were kind. One evening, after a long shift, my manager called me aside. She was a quiet woman with tired eyes. "You work hard," she said. "You never complain." I didn't know what to say. I just nodded. She offered me more hours, not much, but more. That night I cried again, but this time the tears were different. They were soft. They carried relief. Slowly, very slowly, my fear started to loosen its grip. I was still scared, but I was also learning trust in myself. I began to notice small things again. The way my son laughed when bubbles floated in the air. The warmth of sunlight through the window in the morning. I started to feel like a person again, not just a mother trying to survive, but a woman rebuilding her life. One afternoon, while waiting at the daycare, another mother spoke to me. She asked how long I had been coming there. We talked, just small talk at first, then real talk. She told me her story, different from mine, but full of loss too. That was when I realized something important. I was not alone. So many women carried silent battles. That thought stayed with me. Months passed. My son grew taller, stronger. He started preschool. He learned new words, new songs. Watching him grow gave me strength. It reminded me why I kept going. Sometimes, late at night, when he was asleep, I allowed myself to think about the future, not big dreams, just small ones, a better home, a stable job, peace. I did not think about my husband often anymore. When I did, the pain felt distant, like an old bruise that no longer hurt when touched. Then one day I received a letter. It was from him. My hands shook as I opened it. I was not sure what I expected, an apology, an explanation. Instead, it was short and cold. He said he wanted to see his son, nothing about me, nothing about what he had done. I sat at the table for a long time with that letter in my hands. My son was coloring nearby, humming softly. I felt anger rise, not loud anger, quiet, deep anger. How could he walk away so easily and then return like this? As if time had not passed, as if wounds had not formed. I did not respond right away. I needed time. That night I barely slept. I thought about what was best for my child, not my pride, not my pain. After many days, I agreed to meet in a public place for our son. The day came. My heart beat fast as I walked into the cafe. My son held my hand. When I saw my husband, I barely recognized him. He looked older, tired. He smiled at our son, not at me. The meeting was awkward. He tried to act normal, as if we were just a family meeting after work. My son stayed close to me. He was quiet. After an hour, we left. Outside, my husband asked if we could do this again. I said, "We'll see." I felt no warmth, no comfort, only distance. That moment showed me something important. I was no longer the woman he could control. I was no longer dependent on his approval. I was standing on my own. As the months continued, my work improved. I earned a small promotion, more responsibility, a bit more money. I opened my first savings account. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Each step forward felt like reclaiming something he had taken, my dignity, my confidence. I stopped feeling ashamed of where we came from. I started feeling proud of how far we had come. One evening, as I tucked my son into bed, he looked at me and said, "Mommy, you're strong." I smiled. I kissed his forehead. That moment, I knew something deep inside me had changed. No matter what my husband had said, no matter how low he had tried to push us, we were not broken, we were becoming. And I had no idea yet how much stronger I would be 1 year after that night. By the time 1 full year had almost passed since the night we were kicked out, my life looked different, not perfect, not easy, but different in ways I never imagined back then. I no longer woke up with panic in my chest every morning. I still worried about money, about the future, about my son, but the fear no longer controlled me. We had moved again, this time to a small apartment with 2 rooms, one for me, one for my son. The walls were plain and the paint was chipped in some places, but it was ours. I could lock the door at night and know no one would throw us out. The first night there, I sat on the floor because we didn't have furniture yet. My son played with a toy car nearby. I looked around and felt something close to peace. I remembered that cold night outside, the bus seat, the shelter, and I whispered to myself, "You made it this far." Work had become steadier. I was trusted. People relied on me. I started training new workers at the store. I was no longer invisible. Sometimes customers smiled at me and called me by name. That still surprised me. My son was doing well in school. His teacher said he was kind. She said he shared his snacks and helped other kids. Hearing that made my chest ache in a good way. He was growing into someone gentle, someone strong in his own quiet way. My husband still saw him sometimes, not often, only when it fit his schedule. I never forced it. I never begged. I watched closely, always protecting my son's heart. If I saw sadness after visits, I held him longer. If I saw confusion, I answered gently. One evening after a visit, my son asked, "Why does Daddy stay?" The question felt heavy, but I stayed calm. I said, "Sometimes adults don't know how to be there the right way." He nodded. Then he hugged me. That hug told me I was doing something right. As time passed, I noticed something else changing inside me. I started to forgive myself. I forgave myself for staying too long, for ignoring the signs, for believing words that hurt. I realized I had done the best I could with what I knew at the time. That realization softened something inside me. One afternoon, my manager called me into her office. She said the company was opening a larger store. They needed someone dependable. She asked if I would be interested. My heart raced. I was scared, but I said yes. That decision changed everything. The new job paid more. It came with benefits, stability. For the first time in a long while, I could breathe without counting every dollar. I bought my son new shoes without worrying. I bought fresh fruit without guilt. These small things felt big. With that stability came something unexpected, confidence. I started walking differently, speaking clearly, looking people in the eye. I was no longer shrinking to make others comfortable. I started taking evening classes online, nothing fancy, just learning skills that could help me move forward. After my son went to bed, I sat at the table with my laptop. Some nights I was exhausted. But I kept going. I kept remembering that night he kicked us out, not with pain anymore, but with fire. I was proving something, not to him, to myself. One day, my husband showed up unannounced. He stood outside my apartment building. I didn't invite him in. We talked outside. He looked around. He saw the place, the neighborhood. "You're doing okay," he said. There was surprise in his voice, almost disbelief. I nodded. "Yes, we are." He didn't apologize, not really. He said life had been hard. He said he had been angry. I listened, but I didn't let his words sink into me. When he left, I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just clarity. That was the moment I knew I was free, free from needing his approval, free from his judgment. That night, as I watched my son sleep, I thought about the words my husband had screamed, about how they were meant to destroy us. But they didn't. Instead, they pushed me into a life I had to build with my own hands. I was no longer surviving, I was living. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure: no one would ever have the power to throw us away again. By the time the year was almost complete, I thought the hardest part was behind me. I believed the past had finally loosened its hold on my life. I was wrong. Healing is not a straight road. Sometimes it circles back when you least expect it. My son was growing fast. His clothes never seemed to fit for long. Every few months, his shoes were too small, his sleeves too short. One evening, while folding laundry, I stopped and just watched him play on the floor. He was talking to his toys, making up stories. I felt proud and tired, but it was a good kind of tired. That was when my phone buzzed. It was a message from my husband. "I need to talk, it's important." My chest tightened. I stared at the screen for a long time. I didn't answer right away. I had learned something important over the year. Not every message deserves an instant response. Later that night, after my son was asleep, I replied. I asked what he wanted. He said he was struggling. He said life had not gone the way he expected. He said he missed his son. I felt a familiar pull inside me, not love, but memory. I reminded myself of the night he kicked us out, of the words he used, of the fear. Still, I agreed to meet, not alone, in public, on my terms. We met at a park near my apartment. It was quiet. The air was cool. He looked different, thinner, older. For a moment, we just stood there. Silence filled the space between us. "I didn't think you'd do this well," he finally said. There it was, that same tone, that same disbelief. I didn't respond. He started talking about his job, about his loneliness. He said, "I made mistakes." I waited. I waited for real words, but they never came. He never said he was sorry, not for calling me names, not for throwing us out, not for hurting his child. Dead, he said, "I was angry. You pushed me." That was when something inside me hardened. I looked at him and spoke calmly. "I didn't deserve that, neither did our son." He looked away. That meeting ended without resolution, but it gave me something else, clarity. I realized he had not changed. He had only grown tired of the consequences. That night I felt heavy. Old feelings tried to return, doubt, guilt. I sat on my bed in the dark and let myself feel it all. Then I let it go. The next few weeks were quiet. Life returned to routine, work, school, dinner, sleep, but something had shifted inside me. I started thinking about the future more seriously, not just surviving, not just being stable, but growing. I applied for a better position within the company. It meant more responsibility, more pressure. I was scared, but I remembered everything I had already survived. The interview day came. I wore my best clothes. My hands shook. They asked about my experience. About leadership, about challenges, I answered honestly. I spoke about hard work, about resilience. I did not tell them my whole story, but my strength showed through. 2 weeks later, I got the call. I was promoted. I sat in my car and cried, not loudly, just quietly. That promotion meant more than money. It meant proof, proof that I was capable, proof that my past did not define my future. I celebrated that night with my son. We ate ice cream. We laughed. He asked why I was happy. I said, "Because we're moving forward." He smiled and said, "I like forward." So did I. Around that time, my husband started asking for more visits, longer visits, overnight visits. I listened, I considered, then I said no. I explained calmly that consistency mattered. That trust had to be built slowly. He became frustrated. He said I was being unfair. I stayed calm. "I'm protecting our child," I said. That was not something I could compromise on. I started noticing something else too. My son was happier when his routine stayed steady. He slept better, he laughed more. That confirmed my decision. One afternoon, while walking home from school, my son asked, "Mommy, are we poor?" The question stopped me. I knelt down and looked at him. I chose my words carefully. "We don't have everything," I said, "but we have enough and we have each other." He thought for a moment. Then he said, "That's good." Yes, it was good. Later that night, I thought about how close we had come to losing everything, how fragile life can be. I realized that the hardest part of being thrown away was not the loss of a home, it was the loss of worth. And rebuilding that worth took time, patience, pain, but it was happening. I stopped introducing myself as someone's wife. I stopped measuring myself by someone else's approval. I was a mother, a worker, a woman. One evening, my son had a school event. Parents were invited. I sat among other adults, watching children perform songs. My son spotted me and waved. I waved back, my eyes full. I was there, fully present. After the event, another parent spoke to me. She said, "You raised a good kid." Those words stayed with me for days, because despite everything, despite being kicked out, despite being insulted, I had done something right. As the 1 year mark approached, I began to reflect more deeply. I thought about the woman I was before, quiet, afraid. And the woman I was becoming. I still had fears, still had scars, but I no longer believed the words spoken to destroy me. I believed in my own voice now, and that made all the difference. After everything that happened, life did not suddenly become peaceful. It became quieter, yes, but quiet does not always mean calm. There were days when the past returned without warning, a smell, a sound, a word spoken the wrong way. Sometimes it happened at work. A raised voice from a customer would make my hands shake. I would take a deep breath and remind myself where I was. I was safe now. Other times, it happened at night, when the lights were off and my son was asleep. Those were the hardest moments. I would lie in bed and think about how close I had come to losing myself, how easy it would have been to believe the things my husband said, how easy it would have been to give up. I thought about the women at the shelter, about their tired faces and quiet voices. I wondered where they were now. Those thoughts stayed with me. One evening, my son had a bad dream. He woke up crying and calling my name. I rushed into his room and held him. He said he dreamed that we were outside again, that we had nowhere to go. I felt my heart twist. I hugged him tightly and said, "That won't happen again." I realized then that even though he was young, he remembered. His body remembered, just like mine did. From that night on, I became even more careful about our routines. Consistency became my shield, structure became our safety. Every morning we woke up at the same time, we ate breakfast together, I walked him to school. In the evenings, we talked about his day. Even if he only said a few words, I listened closely. I wanted him to feel seen. He deserved that. Around this time, my husband started pushing again, not loudly, quietly. He sent messages asking for more involvement. He said he wanted to be a real father now. Those words stayed with me. They sounded nice, but they came late. I did not shut him out completely. I kept communication open but firm. I told him trust takes time. I told him consistency matters more than promises. He didn't like that, but I did not bend. For the first time in my life, I understood boundaries, not as walls, but as protection. At work, the pressure increased. My new role meant longer hours, more responsibility. Some nights, I came home exhausted. My feet hurt. My head felt full. But there was pride too. I was earning respect. I noticed people listened when I spoke. That was new for me. One afternoon, a younger coworker asked how I stayed so calm under stress. I almost laughed. If only she knew. I told her I've been through worse. And it was true. As the months passed, my savings slowly grew, not fast, but steadily. I opened a second account, one just for emergencies. That account became a symbol, a promise to myself that I would never be trapped again. Sometimes I checked it just to remind myself I was building something solid. During this time, I also started volunteering once a week at the community center, just a few hours, helping with food distribution. The first day I walked in, my chest tightened. The room smelled like the shelter. The memories came rushing back, but then someone smiled at me, and I smiled back. I saw myself in some of the women there, tired, strong, trying. I didn't tell them my whole story. I just listened. Listening felt important. At home, my son started asking more questions about the past, not painful ones, curious ones. He asked where we lived before, why we moved so much. I answered honestly but gently. I told him we went through a hard time, but we didn't stay there. He nodded like he understood. In his own way, he did. One night, as we ate dinner together, he said something that stayed with me. He said, "I like our house because it's quiet." I looked around our small kitchen. The worn table, the chipped cups, and I knew exactly what he meant. Quiet meant safety. Quiet meant no yelling. Quiet meant peace. That was something money could not buy. As the year came closer to its end, I found myself thinking about the exact day we were kicked out. The cold, the fear. I remembered how small I felt standing outside with my child in my arms, how sure I was that my life was over. I wished I could go back and speak to that woman. I wished I could tell her what was coming. I would tell her she would survive, that she would grow stronger than she ever imagined, that one day she would sleep without fear, but I couldn't go back. All I could do was keep moving forward. One afternoon, my husband called unexpectedly. His voice sounded different, nervous. He said he had lost his job. He said things were falling apart. For a moment, I felt that old pull again, that instinct to fix, to carry. Then I stopped myself. I listened, but I did not offer solutions. I did not take responsibility. When the call ended, I felt heavy, but also proud. I had not been pulled back into a role that hurt me. That night, I sat alone in the living room and reflected. I realized how much emotional work I had done, work no one could see. Letting go of guilt was harder than letting go of fear, but I was doing it slowly. I stopped blaming myself for his anger. I stopped asking what I could have done differently. I accepted that his choices were his own. That acceptance felt like freedom. At school, my son was chosen to lead a small group activity. His teacher told me he showed leadership and kindness. I walked home that day with tears in my eyes, not from sadness, from pride. Despite everything, he was growing into a good person. That mattered more than anything. One evening, as we prepared for bed, my son asked, "Mommy, are you happy?" The question surprised me. I thought for a moment before answering. "I'm getting there," I said. He smiled. "That's good," he said, and I realized something important. Happiness was no longer a big dream, it was a direction. As the 1 year mark finally arrived, I woke up early. The date was heavy in my chest. I took the day off work. I wanted to be present. I made breakfast for my son. We ate slowly. Later, we went to the park, the same park where I had once met my husband to talk. This time, it felt different. I watched my son run and laugh. I sat on a bench and breathed deeply. 1 year ago, I was standing outside in the cold with nowhere to go. Now I was sitting in the sun with stability and strength. That contrast felt unreal. I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt gratitude, gratitude for my resilience, for my child, for the quiet strength I found inside myself. I didn't know what the future held, but I trusted myself now, and that trust was something no one could ever take away. After the 1 year mark passed, something inside me settled. Not because life became easy, but because I stopped waiting for things to fall apart. I had spent so long living in survival mode that calm felt strange. Some mornings I woke up expecting bad news. When it didn't come, I felt confused. It took time to trust peace. My days became fuller, work demanded more focus. My son needed more attention as he grew. He asked more questions now, not just about his day, but about the world, about people, about right and wrong. One evening, while we were washing dishes together, he asked, "Why do some people yell when they're angry?" I froze for a second, then I answered slowly. "Some people don't know how to handle their feelings," I said, "but yelling hurts others." He nodded and went back to drying a plate. That simple moment felt important. I realized I was teaching him things I had never been taught about respect, about calm, about kindness. That realization filled me with responsibility and pride. At work, I started leading more meetings. Standing in front of people used to scare me. My voice would shake. Now it stayed steady. I spoke clearly. I trusted myself. People listened. One afternoon, my manager pulled me aside again. She said she saw potential in me. She asked if I had ever thought about long-term growth. Her words stayed with me all evening. Long-term. The phrase felt heavy and hopeful at the same time. For so long, my thinking stopped at tomorrow or next week. Now someone was asking me to look further. That night after my son was asleep, I sat at the table and wrote things down. Goals, not dreams, just steps. Finish my courses, save more money, move into a better place one day. I didn't rush myself. I had learned patience the hard way. My husband became quieter during this time. He didn't call as much. He didn't push. Part of me wondered if he had accepted the distance. Another part didn't care anymore. I no longer measured my progress by his reaction. There were still hard days, days when I felt tired down to my bones, days when I doubted myself, but I noticed something different. I didn't stay down as long. When sadness came, I let it sit for a while, then I moved. That was new. One winter morning, my car wouldn't start. I stood outside in the cold, my breath visible in the air. A year ago, something like that would have sent me into panic. Now I took a deep breath. I called for help. I solved the problem. That moment showed me how far I had come. At home, my son started helping more. He put away his toys. He set the table. One night, as we ate dinner, he said, "Mommy, we're a team." I smiled so hard my cheeks hurt. "Yes," I said, "we are." Being a team meant we trusted each other. It meant we faced problems together. It meant we talked. I never hid my emotions from him, but I never let them overwhelm him either. I wanted him to see strength without fear. Sometimes memories still surprised me. A loud knock on a door, a sharp tone. My body would tense before my mind caught up, but then I reminded myself where I was. I reminded myself I was safe. Healing was not about forgetting, it was about learning how to live with what happened. One afternoon, I ran into someone from my past, an old neighbor from the apartment we shared with my husband. She looked surprised to see me. She asked how I was doing. I hesitated. Then I said, "I'm doing well." And I meant it. For a moment, I wondered what she had heard about me, what stories were told. Then I realized it didn't matter. My truth lived with me, not with others. At my son's school, they hosted a family day. Parents were invited to join activities. I watched other families interact. Some were loud, some distant. I didn't compare anymore. I focused on my son's smile, on his hand in mine. At one point, he introduced me to his teacher and said, "This is my mom. She takes care of me." Those words felt bigger than any title. They told the whole story. Later that evening, as we walked home, he asked, "Mommy, do you think people can change?" I thought about it carefully. "Yes," I said, "but only if they want to." He accepted that answer easily. Children often do. I wondered if I believed it myself. I believed people could grow. I knew because I had, but I also believed not everyone chooses to, and that was not my responsibility. My husband called again one night. His voice was softer. He asked how our son was doing. I told him honestly. He asked about me. That surprised me. "I'm okay," I said. He paused. Then he said, "You seem different." I smiled to myself. "I am." That was all I said. After the call ended, I didn't feel shaken. I didn't replay the conversation in my head. That peace felt powerful. I spent more time doing small things that brought joy, reading before bed, walking without rushing. I allowed myself rest. Rest used to feel like laziness. Now it felt necessary. One evening, I stood at the window and watched the city lights. I thought about how many women were standing somewhere tonight feeling alone. I wished I could tell them what I had learned. That strength does not come all at once. That survival can turn into growth. I didn't feel like a victim anymore. I felt like a woman who had lived through something hard and learned from it. That identity felt honest. As months passed, my confidence continued to grow. Not loudly, quietly. I trusted my decisions. I trusted my instincts. I no longer apologized for existing. One night, my son fell asleep on the couch while we were watching a movie. I carried him to bed. As I tucked him in, I realized something simple and important. We were safe, not just physically. Emotionally, that safety was something I had built, piece by piece. I didn't know what the next year would bring. But I knew I would face it differently. I would face it standing tall, with my child beside me, and no one's words would ever have the power to break us again. As time moved forward, I noticed something quiet but important. I was no longer counting days since we were kicked out. I was counting moments that mattered. Life didn't suddenly become full of joy, but it became steady, and steadiness felt like a gift. My son started waking up before me some mornings. I would hear him moving around quietly, trying not to make noise. He would climb into my bed and whisper, "Good morning." Those mornings felt soft, safe, nothing like the chaos we once lived in. I began to understand how deeply safety changes a child, how much calmer he was, how much lighter his laughter sounded. I realized I was healing too, even when I wasn't trying. Healing came through routine, through trust, through time. At work, people started asking for my opinion more often. Not because I demanded it, but because I had earned it. That still felt strange. I remembered a time when I barely spoke above a whisper at home, when every word felt like it might cause a storm. Now my voice stayed steady. One afternoon, a problem came up at work. A delivery was delayed. People were upset. I stood there and listened. I didn't panic. I didn't freeze. I made decisions. I handled it. Later, my manager thanked me. She said, "You stay calm under pressure." I smiled politely. Inside, I thought about how pressure used to crush me. Now it shaped me. That evening, I told my son about my day in simple words. I said I helped fix a problem. He looked at me and said, "That's because you don't give up." I didn't correct him. I let that belief stay. At home, I made small changes. I hung pictures on the walls. I bought a plant. Those things may sound small, but they mattered. They made the space feel lived in, like a place meant to be stayed in. I stopped living like I might need to leave at any moment. That was a big step. One night while cleaning, I found an old photo. It was from years ago, before everything fell apart. I was standing next to my husband, smiling. I studied my face in that picture. I looked younger, quieter. I didn't feel anger. I felt sadness, not for him, for her. She didn't know what was coming. She didn't know how strong she would have to become. I put the photo away, not because I was afraid of it, but because it no longer defined me. Some evenings, my husband would send messages asking how our son was doing. I replied politely, briefly. I no longer felt the need to explain my choices or defend my boundaries. That peace was hard earned. One weekend, my son and I visited the library. We spent hours there. He picked books about animals and space. I picked books about learning and growth. Sitting there, surrounded by quiet voices and pages turning, I felt full, not rich, not powerful. Just full. That feeling was new. As months passed, I noticed I laughed more, real laughter, the kind that comes without effort. It surprised me sometimes. I would catch myself smiling and wonder why. The answer was simple. I was no longer afraid all the time. Fear drains joy. Safety allows it back. One night, my son asked if we could talk before bed. He said he had something on his mind. We lay side by side, staring at the ceiling. He said, "I don't remember when Daddy lived with us very well." I stayed quiet, I didn't rush. That's okay, I said gently. He thought for a moment. Then he said, I remember you always being there. My chest tightened. That was the story he was carrying, and that mattered. I realized then that children don't remember details the way adults do. They remember feelings, and the feeling I gave him was presence. At work, new challenges came, more expectations, more pressure. There were days when I felt stretched thin, days when I questioned if I could keep up. But then I reminded myself of where I started, of what I survived. Perspective became my anchor. One afternoon, my car radio played a song from years ago, a song my husband used to like. For a moment, my stomach tightened. The memory came fast, but then it passed. I didn't turn the song off. I let it play. That moment showed me how far I had come. The memory no longer controlled my body. That was healing. I started sleeping better, not perfectly, but deeply. When I woke up, I didn't feel dread anymore. I felt readiness. I stopped asking myself, what if everything goes wrong? I started asking, what if things keep going right? That shift changed everything. One evening, my husband asked if he could attend a school event. I agreed with clear boundaries. We stood on opposite sides of the room. We were polite, distant. Watching him interact with our son, I felt calm, not threatened, not hopeful, just observant. I realized I had stopped wishing for the past to return. I didn't want the family we were. I valued the life we built. After the event, my husband tried to talk. He said, You've changed a lot. I nodded. Yes, he didn't know what else to say, and that was fine. At home later that night, my son fell asleep quickly. I sat alone for a while. I thought about the word tramp, the word that started everything. I thought about how deeply words can cut, how long they can stay. But I also thought about how powerless they become when you stop believing them. I no longer heard that word in my head. It had lost its voice. I replaced it with others, strong, capable, enough. Those words felt true. As the seasons changed, so did I. Winter passed, spring came. We spent more time outside, walking, breathing fresh air. One day, while watching my son run ahead of me, I felt something warm rise in my chest. Hope, not desperate hope, quiet hope, the kind that doesn't need proof. I didn't know what the future would bring. I didn't need to. I trusted myself to handle it. And that trust was the biggest change of all. I used to believe that once you survive something painful, life becomes gentle. I know now that survival does not mean protection from future storms. It means you learn how to stand when they come. The year after everything settled was not dramatic. There were no big moments, just ordinary days. But sometimes ordinary days carry quiet tests. My son was growing into himself. He was more aware of people, of words, of changes. He noticed things he never noticed before. One afternoon after school, he walked more slowly than usual. His shoulders were down, his voice was quiet. I asked if everything was okay. He shrugged. At home, he sat at the table and pushed his food around. He didn't eat much. That night, as I tucked him into bed, he finally spoke. Mommy, he said softly, why don't we have a dad like other kids? The question did not surprise me, but it still hurt. I sat beside him and took my time. I didn't want to rush my answer. I wanted it to be honest but gentle. Families can look different, I said. What matters is love. He nodded, but I could tell he was thinking. After he fell asleep, I stayed in his room longer than usual. I watched him breathe. I wondered what he carried inside that I could not see. The next few weeks, I noticed small changes. He became quieter at school. Teacher mentioned he seemed distracted. That worried me. I asked him again if something was bothering him. At first, he said no. Then one evening, as we were brushing our teeth, he said, Some kids say things. I paused. What kind of things? He looked down. They say my dad left because we're bad. My chest tightened. I turned off the water and knelt in front of him. I looked into his eyes. That is not true, I said clearly. Not even a little. He looked unsure. Children believe what they hear. I held his face gently. Your dad leaving had nothing to do with you or me. He nodded slowly, but I knew words alone were not enough. That night I felt something I had not felt in a long time. Anger, not loud anger, focused anger, not at the children who spoke without understanding, but at the wound that had been left behind. I realized something important. Healing myself was not enough anymore. I had to help my son understand his story too. The next day, I asked his teacher if we could talk. She listened carefully. She said children often repeat what they hear at home. She promised to watch more closely. I thanked her. At home, I began having small conversations with my son, not heavy ones, simple ones. I told him he was loved, that he was good, that nothing about him was broken. I repeated these things gently again and again, because sometimes children need to hear the truth many times before it sticks. Around this time, my husband became more present. He asked to attend school events. He asked to spend more time with our son. I watched carefully. I said yes to some things, no to others. I was not afraid of him anymore, but I was cautious. One afternoon, my husband asked if we could talk alone, just us. I agreed, but only in a public place. We sat across from each other, the way we had so many times before, but this time felt different. He told me he felt like he was losing his son, that he didn't know how to fix it. I listened. Then I said something I had never said before. "You hurt him when you left," I said, "and when you said those words." He looked uncomfortable. "I was angry," he said. "I know," I replied, "but anger doesn't erase damage." He was quiet. For a moment, I saw something in his eyes, regret maybe. He asked if I hated him. I shook my head. "No," I said, "but I don't trust you yet." That honesty felt powerful. When I went home that evening, I felt tired, emotionally tired. I realized that strength does not mean never feeling pain again. It means facing it without losing yourself. I hugged my son tightly that night. I told him I was proud of him. He asked why. "Because you talk about your feelings," I said, "and that's brave." He smiled. That smile reminded me why I had to stay strong, not just for me, for him. I didn't know what the next test would be. But I knew one thing: I would face it standing. After that conversation, I became more aware of how much my son was listening, not just to words, but to tone, to pauses, to silence. Children learn what we don't say as much as what we do. I made a quiet decision. I would not let the past shape his identity, not through anger, not through shame, but through truth. One evening, while we were sitting on the couch together, I asked him a question. "What do you think makes a good person?" He thought for a moment. "Being nice," he said, "and helping." I smiled. "Yes," I said, "and telling the truth." He leaned against me, listening. I told him that sometimes adults make choices because they are hurt inside, not because children are bad, not because families fail. He didn't ask many questions. He just listened. That told me he was taking it in. Over the next few weeks, I noticed a change. He spoke more freely again. He laughed louder. His teacher said he seemed lighter. More confident. That was all I needed to hear. My husband tried harder during this time. He showed up when he said he would. He stayed longer. I didn't rush to trust him. Trust, once broken, needs patience. But I watched. I saw effort, not perfection, but effort. That mattered. One afternoon, after a visit, my son said something unexpected. "Daddy said he was wrong before." I stayed calm. I didn't react too fast. "What do you think about that?" I asked. He shrugged. "I think people can say sorry." I nodded. "Yes," I said, "they can." But I also knew something my son didn't yet understand. Saying sorry is only the beginning. Change is what comes after. As weeks passed, my husband and I communicated more clearly. Not warmly, not coldly, respectfully. We talked only about our son, schedules, needs. I didn't reopen old wounds. I didn't relive the past. I stayed focused on the present. That choice gave me peace. One night after my son fell asleep, I sat alone in the living room. I thought about how far we had come, not just from homelessness, but from fear. I remembered how small I felt the night we were kicked out, how ashamed, how broken. Now I felt whole, not because life was perfect, but because I trusted myself. That trust changed how I moved through the world. I no longer felt the need to explain my story to anyone. I didn't hide it, but I didn't carry it like a wound either. It was part of me, not all of me. One weekend, my son and I went to the park again, the same one we had visited on the 1 year mark. He ran ahead, full of energy. I watched him from a bench. I realized something then. This was the life I had fought for: not wealth, not approval, peace, a simple, steady peace. My husband arrived later that day to pick him up. We spoke briefly. As my son walked toward him, he turned back and waved at me. That small gesture filled my chest. It told me he felt secure. He knew I was still there. After they left, I didn't feel empty. I felt balanced. That surprised me. In the past, moments like that would have filled me with fear: fear of losing him, fear of being replaced. Now I trusted our bond. That trust came from consistency, from years of showing up. You cannot replace that with words. As time passed, I became more open to the idea that my story didn't end with pain, it transformed. I didn't need my husband to fail for me to succeed. I didn't need revenge. I needed growth, and I had it. One evening, my son asked me something simple. "Mommy, do you think we're strong?" I smiled. "Yes," I said, "I know we are." He smiled back. "That's good," he said. That was enough. Strength, I learned, is not loud. It does not shout. It does not prove. It shows up again and again. As I turned off the lights that night, I felt calm, not because I knew what the future held, but because I knew who I was. I was no longer the woman standing outside in the cold, holding a child and wondering how she would survive. I was the woman who did, and I was raising a child who knew his worth. That was the greatest victory of all. There are moments in life when the past doesn't just whisper, it knocks hard. I didn't expect that moment to come the way it did. It was an ordinary afternoon. I had just finished work and was waiting outside my son's school. Parents stood around, checking their phones, talking quietly. Then I saw him. My husband was standing near the gate, not for a visit, not for an event, just standing there watching. My chest tightened, but I stayed calm. I reminded myself that this was my life now. I didn't need to panic. When my son came out, he ran to me like he always did. I knelt down and hugged him. Then he noticed his father. "Daddy," he said, surprised. My husband smiled and waved. I felt a familiar tension rise, but I kept my voice steady. I told my son we would talk later. I asked him to wait with his teacher. Then I walked over to my husband. "What are you doing here?" I asked quietly. He looked nervous. He said he just wanted to see his son. He said he missed him. I told him visits needed to be planned. I reminded him of boundaries. He nodded, but I could tell something was different. He looked unsettled. Later that evening, after my son was asleep, my husband called. He asked if we could talk. I agreed, again in public. We met at a small cafe, the same one where we had spoken before. But this time his face looked different, not defensive, not angry, tired. He took a deep breath and said something I never thought I would hear. "I was wrong," he said. The words hung in the air. I didn't respond right away. I waited. "I treated you badly," he continued. "I said things I shouldn't have said." My heart beat faster, not with hope, with caution. He looked down at his hands. "I think about that night a lot," he said. "The night I kicked you out." I stayed silent. He finally looked up at me. His eyes were wet. "I ruined my family," he said. Those words should have felt powerful. They should have brought relief, but instead I felt something unexpected, distance. I realized that even his regret could not pull me back into the past. I had moved too far forward. I told him the truth. I said his words hurt deeply, that they stayed with me for a long time. I told him I had rebuilt my life piece by piece without his help. He listened, really listened. For the first time, he did not interrupt. He did not defend himself. He asked if I had ever forgiven him. The question caught me off guard. I thought for a long moment. "I don't carry anger anymore," I said slowly. "But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting." He nodded. "I don't expect anything," he said. I just needed to say it. When we left the cafe, I felt lighter, not because he apologized, but because I realized I no longer needed it to heal. That night, I slept deeply. The next few weeks were quiet again, but something had shifted. My son noticed it too. One evening, he asked, "Mommy, why was Daddy sad?" I chose my words carefully. "Because sometimes people realize their mistakes later," I said. He thought about that. Then he said, "I'm glad you're not sad." I smiled. "I'm glad too," I said. At work, things continued to grow. I was given more responsibility, more trust. I started mentoring a new employee. She reminded me of myself years ago. Quiet, unsure, I tried to be patient with her, to encourage her. I remembered how powerful kindness can be. At home, my son started talking about the future, about what he wanted to be: a teacher, a builder, a helper. I listened with a full heart. One evening, as I tucked him in, he said, "Mommy, thank you for taking care of me." The words took my breath away. "You don't have to thank me," I said softly. "But I want to," he replied. That moment stayed with me. It reminded me that everything I had done mattered, even the hard parts, especially the hard parts. As days passed, I reflected more on forgiveness, not as something given to others, but as something given to myself. I forgave myself for staying too long, for being afraid, for believing hurtful words. I forgave myself for not knowing then what I know now. That forgiveness felt like closing a door gently, not slamming it, not locking it, just closing it. I felt ready for whatever came next. I didn't know that something else was coming, something that would test everything I had learned, but I knew one thing: I was no longer the woman who could be pushed aside. After that conversation, life did not suddenly change. There was no dramatic shift, no big announcement. But something inside me settled more deeply than before. I realized that the past no longer held unanswered questions, not because everything was fixed, but because I had stopped waiting for it to be. I moved through my days with a quiet confidence, not the kind that needs to be seen, the kind that lives inside your chest and stays there. My son continued to grow. He was taller now, more thoughtful. Sometimes he asked questions that showed how much he had absorbed, questions about fairness, about kindness, About choices, one evening while we were cleaning up after dinner, he said, "Mommy, do you think people can learn from their mistakes?" I paused. "Yes," I said, "some do." He nodded. "And some don't," he added. I smiled softly. "That's true too." He went back to stacking plates, satisfied with the answer. I noticed that he was learning balance. Not everything is black or white, not everything needs fixing. That understanding felt like a gift. My husband became quieter after his apology. He didn't push for more than what we had agreed on. He showed up when he said he would. I watched carefully. I stayed grounded. I did not let hope rush ahead of reality. One afternoon, he asked if we could talk again. I agreed, but this time I felt calm walking into the conversation. He told me he had started therapy, that he was trying to understand his anger, that he wanted to be better. I listened. I believed he was sincere, but sincerity was no longer enough to move me. I told him I respected the effort. I told him our son deserved consistency. I told him healing takes time. He nodded. He didn't argue. That alone told me how much had changed. Afterward, I felt proud of myself, not for being strong, but for being clear. Clarity had replaced fear. At work, I was offered a chance to take on a new project. It meant learning something new, stepping outside my comfort zone. I said yes. The old me would have doubted herself, wondered if she was ready. The new me trusted growth. Some nights I stayed up late studying, my eyes tired, my mind full, but I felt alive. I was investing in my future, in my son's future. One evening, as I worked at the table, my son came out of his room and sat across from me. He watched quietly for a while. "What are you doing?" he asked. "I'm learning," I said. He smiled. "I like learning," he said. That moment felt like everything coming full circle. I was showing him something without saying it out loud. That it's never too late to grow. That effort matters. As weeks passed, I noticed I no longer introduced my story with pain. I didn't define myself by what I survived. I defined myself by what I built. That shift felt powerful. I also noticed that my body felt lighter. I slept better. I breathed deeper. Letting go of old tension freed more than my mind. It freed my body too. One night, after my son was asleep, I sat by the window again. The city lights were familiar now. I thought about the word that started everything. The insult meant to break me. I realized something important. Words only have power when we carry them. I had put that word down. It no longer followed me. I thought about the woman I was that night, standing outside with nothing but fear and love for her child. I felt compassion for her, not pity. She did what she had to do, and because of her, I was here. As months moved on, life continued in its quiet rhythm. School, work, home. I found joy in simple routines, morning coffee, evening walks. I no longer rushed through my days. One afternoon, my son asked if we could make plans for the weekend, just us. We planned a picnic, nothing special. That weekend, we sat on the grass and shared food. We laughed, we talked. I watched him eat and thought about how close I came to losing moments like this. That thought didn't bring sadness, it brought gratitude. I had protected these moments, I had fought for them. Later that evening, my husband called. He asked how the picnic went. I told him honestly. It was good. There was no tension in my voice, no edge. After the call ended, I realized something. I had reached a place where his presence or absence no longer defined my emotional state. That was freedom. As the year moved forward, I began to think about what story I wanted my son to remember, not the details, but the feeling. I wanted him to remember safety, consistency, love. I wanted him to know that hard things can happen and people can still rise. One night, as I tucked him in, he said something quietly. "Mommy, I feel safe." Those words stayed with me long after he fell asleep. They were the proof, the reward, the reason I didn't need anything else. The past had spoken. I had listened. Now I was choosing peace. After everything that had been said and faced, life became quieter in a new way, not empty, not lonely, just steady. I didn't wake up thinking about the past anymore. Some mornings, I woke up thinking about breakfast, about the weather, about what my son might wear to school. Those small thoughts felt like progress. My son had grown into a rhythm of his own. He woke up without fear. He moved through the house like he belonged there. That mattered more than I ever expected. One morning, as I packed his lunch, he stood beside me and talked about his day ahead. A spelling test, a drawing project, nothing heavy, nothing painful. I listened and smiled, feeling a quiet pride. This was what normal felt like. At work, I continued taking on more responsibility, not because I wanted to prove anything, but because I felt ready. There was a time when pressure made my chest tight. Now it made me focus. I trusted myself to handle problems as they came. One afternoon, a coworker asked how I stayed so calm. I paused before answering. I've learned that panic doesn't fix anything, I said. Action does. She nodded like she understood. That moment reminded me how much I had changed. At home, I created small traditions with my son. Friday night dinners where we cooked together, Sunday walks after breakfast. These routines grounded us. They gave us something to look forward to. One evening, while we were cooking, my son asked, "Do you think our life will always be like this?" I smiled gently. "Life changes," I said, "but we'll handle it together." He seemed satisfied with that. I noticed that my husband stayed consistent during this time. He didn't disappear. He didn't push too hard. That consistency mattered for our son. I didn't rush into trust. I let it build slowly, naturally. There were moments when I still felt cautious. That was okay. Trust does not mean forgetting, it means choosing wisely. One afternoon, my husband asked if he could attend a parent meeting with me. I thought about it carefully. I agreed. We sat next to each other, not touching, listening. Focused on our son, there was no tension, no old pain rising, just two adults sharing responsibility. That felt like progress. Afterward, we spoke briefly outside, nothing emotional, nothing heavy. As I walked home, I realized something important. I no longer needed distance to feel safe. I needed clarity, and I had it. That clarity changed how I saw the future. I stopped thinking of it as something fragile, something that could break at any moment. I saw it as something flexible, something I could adjust to. That belief gave me strength. One night after my son fell asleep, I sat with a cup of tea and reflected. I thought about the years ahead, not in detail, just in feeling. I felt capable, prepared. That was new. In the past, the future felt like a threat. Now it felt like space. At school, my son started bringing friends home. The house filled with noise and laughter. I watched from the kitchen, smiling, listening. There was a time when I thought laughter like this was lost to us forever. I was wrong. One afternoon, after his friends left, my son said, "I like our house." "Why?" I asked. "Because it feels calm," he said. That word again, calm. It followed us everywhere now. As the months passed, I became more comfortable sharing my story in small ways, not the pain, but the lessons. I spoke to another mother once who was struggling. I didn't give advice, I just listened. I told her she wasn't weak for feeling tired. That strength often looks quiet. She cried. I held her hand. In that moment, I realized how far I had come. I was no longer the one needing to be held. I could offer support. That realization filled me with purpose. At work, my new project challenged me. There were setbacks, mistakes. I didn't fall apart. I learned. I adjusted. When I succeeded, I didn't rush past it. I allowed myself to feel proud. That was something I had never done before. I also noticed how my body felt different, less tense, more present. I breathed deeper, moved slower. I no longer rushed through life. One evening, my son and I sat on the couch watching a movie. Halfway through, he fell asleep against me. I didn't move. I held him and listened to his steady breathing. That simple moment felt like everything I had worked for: safety, peace, love. I thought about how easily that night long ago could have broken me. How close I came to believing the worst things about myself. I felt grateful I didn't, not because I was special, but because I chose to keep going. As the year continued, my husband and I found a steady rhythm, not friendship, not closeness, respect. We communicated clearly, we stayed focused on our son. That balance worked. One evening after a visit, my son said something that surprised me. "Daddy seems calmer now." I nodded. "Yes," I said, "he's learning." That was all. I didn't fill the space with hope or doubt. I let reality speak for itself. At night before bed, I often reflected on one question: who am I now? The answer was simple. I was a woman who trusted herself, a mother who protected her child, a person who chose growth over bitterness. That identity felt solid. I no longer feared being alone. I enjoyed my own company. I no longer feared judgment. I understood my worth. One weekend, my son and I went back to the shelter area to donate clothes. He asked why we were there. I told him gently that some people need help sometimes, just like we once did. He nodded seriously. As we left, he held my hand tightly. I felt his grip. That told me he remembered enough to care, but not enough to hurt. That balance felt right. On the way home, he asked, "Do you think we're lucky?" I thought for a moment. "Yes," I said, "but we also worked very hard." He smiled. "I like working hard," he said. That made me laugh. As time passed, the pain of the past faded into understanding. Not everything healed completely, but everything softened. I didn't need closure anymore. I had peace. And peace, I learned, is not loud. It is quiet, steady, strong. As I stood at the window one night, watching the city lights again, I realized something important. I was no longer defined by what was done to me. I was defined by what I chose afterward. And that choice changed everything. Sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and my son is asleep, I think back to that moment when everything broke, the shouting, the words that cut deep, the door closing behind us. For a long time, that moment lived inside me like a shadow. No matter how far I walked, it followed. But now, when I think of it, it feels different, not sharp, not heavy, just distant. I understand now that some words are thrown not because they are true, but because the person saying them is afraid, afraid of losing control, afraid of facing themselves. I was not weak for leaving that night. I was strong for surviving what came after. There were days when I didn't know how I would keep going, days when my body moved but my heart felt tired. But every morning my son woke up, and I woke up with him. That was enough. I learned that love is not loud promises. It is quiet actions. It is staying when it is hard. I learned that dignity is not given by others. It is something you hold on to, even when someone tries to take it from you. I also learned that pain does not disappear all at once. It fades slowly, as life fills the space around it. Today, when I look at my son, I don't see fear anymore. I see confidence, curiosity. I see a child who knows he is safe. That safety did not come from luck, it came from choices. From nights I stayed strong when I wanted to give up. From days I chose patience over anger. From moments I chose to believe in myself even when it was hard. My husband's words no longer define us. They never truly did. What defines us is what came after: the work, the healing, the love. I don't hate him. I don't carry bitterness. I understand that people break in different ways, but breaking does not give anyone the right to destroy others. I set boundaries. I protected my child. I protected myself, and that changed everything. If there is one thing I know now, it is this: your worst moment does not decide your future. The night we were kicked out did not make us less, it made us stronger. It showed me who I could be when everything was taken away. I became someone I respect. I became someone my son looks up to, and that matters more than anything. If someone listening to this feels small right now, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not what someone calls you in anger. You are not the worst thing that happened to you. You are what you choose to do next. It might take time. It might take patience you don't think you have. But step by step, you can build something new. I did, and today our life is not perfect, but it is peaceful. We laugh, we plan, we move forward. The past stays where it belongs, behind us. I tuck my son in every night, and I know in my heart that he will grow up knowing love, safety, and self-worth. That is the greatest answer to every cruel word spoken in the past. That is how the story truly ends, not with anger, not with revenge, but with quiet strength and hope.